Chinese by blood, Filipino by heart. #Roots is brought to you by Dash Cargo, propelling possibilities. BA Securities, your trading partner in Asia Pacific.
We are people who are comfortable with our Filipino identity, but we take pride in our Chinese origins and our Chinese cultural heritage. Our blood may be Chinese, but our roots grow deep into Philippine soil, and our bonds are with the Filipino people. I grew up in Binondo until siguro my young adulthood. After my graduation from UP, I left for abroad, and then when I got married, I moved out of Binondo. So, like any other place, Binondo is in flux, no? Ever transforming, ever evolving, ever changing. No? It cannot stand still. The traditional values that the Chinese hold dear are deeply embedded in Philippine values itself, and vice versa. For example, respect for elders. No? You see Filipinos, mano po, you see how they respect and take care of their elders. The same with the Chinese, maybe they emphasize it more. That's why you hardly see older Chinese being put into the old folks' home. No? When my father used to tell me that when he came at 9 years old, his first job was to work as an apprentice in a Chinese restaurant. Being 9 years old, they're allowed to sleep siguro 9 o'clock after cleaning up. But the older children, 10 and 11 or 12, have to finish cleaning up restaurants and they go to bed at about 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock. And then in the morning, they wake up at 4 or 5 to prepare for the next day. That's how hard they work. They don't mind working 18-hour, 20-hour days, no? That's why the famous saying na yung galit na galit yung mga older Chinese, no? Yung inchik beho tulo laway. Always falling asleep with saliva drooling down his mouth because he lacks sleep and he's very tired, he works very hard. That should be epitomized really what our older generation had to go through for their success. But the difference is that the younger generation have an easier way than the older generation. So I wish they would also value the way of their ancestors of working very hard, of saving money for a rainy day, and not just spend money as if there's no tomorrow. No? The value of money is very important to the Chinese Filipinos. On the whole, I think they still do that. No? They don't just splurge on things. No?
Financial security is very strong among the Chinese. But I've also seen, not only with the next generation, but even with my parents, no? How when times change, they also get to see na, uy, ang sarap pala magpahinga konti and enjoy whatever hard work that we have. I might not have the worldly wealth like some of my siblings would have. But then if you talk to us, all of us are fulfilled in life. We know that we are living the life that we were designed to live. That our parents raised us up with the same value system, the same passion and tenacity for work, pero our expressions would be very different. My sister now works for a non-profit organization helping the urban and the rural poor of our nation, but she uses her entrepreneurship to make things grow in that area of helping the poor. I work for the church, some of my brothers are in business and e-commerce, and parang yung manifestation ng mga growing up, parang it's expressed differently, yet we have that same value system.
A lot of values are shared between Filipino Chinese because we learn from each other, and we learn from the different cultures available here in the Philippines, more so. We even learn some of the very Western values because we were under Spanish for more than 300 years, and other American came here also for a few decades. Then we have the Japanese, so it's a mix. It is not purely Chinese, it's not purely Western, or it's not purely Filipino. It is a mix of all of these values put together, which is what we are today.
I don't think there's any difference between the aspirations of the older ones from the younger ones. They all want to succeed, no? But probably it's the difference in their definition of success. Because for the older generation, just to provide well for your families here or back home in China was more than enough, no? You provide well. But here, among the younger generation, the aspiration is probably just like many of the younger Filipinos, no? The young ones are not afraid to take risk, to borrow money from the banks to do their businesses. And one drawback probably, the word of honor is no longer as respected as before. But now it's easier because you can always say, I will just borrow from the bank and all these things. No? So there are priorities that have changed. Some of them, yeah, for the better, but some of them, I think we are retrogressing by creating even more problems. I think the older generation have to respect and understand that times have changed, no? We have to learn to accept that and respect that. In the same way as the younger ones have a lot of things to learn from the older ones, no? So the conflict can always be reduced by communication. I grew up in an environment when the elders hardly talk to us, no, the younger ones. So there's no line of communication. But things have changed now. Parents are very hands-on in raising their children.
When it comes to parenting our kids now, comparing it to the older generation, I think the key is you have to learn how to connect. Connecting with your kids' heart is so crucial if you want to influence and impact their lives. So now, my goal is to connect to their heart. How do I connect to their heart? I can only connect to their heart if I now have ways and means that would go beyond the superficial of the daily activities. Anong schedule mo? Kailangan mo ba ng driver? Ito allowance mo? I have to go beyond the shallow conversation to get into their hearts. How do you feel? What makes you happy? I think yung adjustment na sa magulang yan. Because your kids would not control the environment at home. The parents will. So if you complain about your kids not opening up to you, it points back to you. Why? What environment have you created at home kung kaya't walang healthy communication?
How I wish the educational institutions will perform their role, no, as the bridge of understanding. But many of the Chinoy schools now are still very, very traditional and ethnocentric. In fact, Sinocentric, no? They seem to project an image that the Chinese are always superior, no? So we have to change this kind of attitudes and educate this generation of Chinese Filipinos as Filipinos in Philippine society. Unlike our ancestors when they wanted to go back to China, they stayed here with dreams of going back to China. Here, the younger generation are rooted in Philippine soil. they must be educated as Filipinos, but at the same time, impart on them the value of respecting and taking pride in their Chinese cultural heritage.
Chinese by blood, Filipino by heart. #Roots is brought to you by Landlight, your total lighting solution. Poland Hopia. Chinese General Hospital and Medical Center. Exceptional care within reach. AgriPro Premier Nutrition Inc. GAOC. Jimmy C. Chua Beng Tang. Nation Paper Products and Printing Corporation. Japan Parts Trading Center. Alejandro Co. Global Diesel and GU Engineering. Enrique Chua. Sherwin Choi. Albert Ko. Jersey Haven. Veco Paper. Water Care. PG Flex Linoleum and Maruyama Tarpaulin. Tony D. William Goshako. Chinese by blood, Filipino by heart.
Things always have to change, to adjust, and to adapt. Unfortunately, sometimes it's not changed for the better. How I wish we could introduce the real Chinese Filipino traditions that we grew up with. For example, during Chinese New Year, you see a lot of lucky charms being sold, you see talismans and everything. No, our ancestors succeeded in the Philippines without consulting anything like the feng shui or any of the Chinese talismans or and these lucky charms. They paid for their success with their blood, their sweat, and their tears. It's very unfortunate that you are selling to Filipinos superficial things that never made an impact on the lives of our ancestors because they just work hard. They save hard, they work hard, and they were frugal in their lives, and they kept their word of honor, and that was the roots of their successes, no? Not the commercialism that is being sold now, no? That everywhere, no? Is being emphasized. People want to find easy solutions. Now, times are hard. Times have changed. We live in the fast-track environment, so people like shortcuts. Kung maka-shortcut naman ako, maglagay lang ako ng wealth god dito sa altar ko, baka yumaman naman ako, no? So people like that. It's sales, it's commercialism. The things that we share with them in common, the food that we eat, no? The language. Hikaw is he, tenga, kao is ring. Earring, naging earring, di ba? Tianxi, sosi, and all this became borrowed in Philippine vocabulary because they are frequently used. These are things that are frequently used. Bimpo, bin is face, po is cloth. The face cloth, face towel is bimpo. So these are things that the Chinese brought here, no? Even as simple as needles. Needles, imagine that, making life easier for sewing the fish nets, sinkers for fish nets, and the needles for sewing. These were things that were brought in by the Chinese that made life easier for the Spanish colony. And then we became very famous in Philippines, became very famous in Europe because of the Manila-Acapulco galleon trade.
Most of the Chinese who came here in the Philippines way back in the 1900s are farmers. And many of them are traders also. When they came over to the Philippines, their main thrust is to make a living. Kung magtatrabaho sila, since they're Chinese, it's very hard to find jobs in the Philippines at that time in the 1900s. So they decided to just buy and sell. They buy products and then they sell it at a higher price or make a little profit. And that started everything. During Magsaysay presidency, they decided to limit retail to Filipinos. So a lot of Chinese were forced to look at manufacturing because they cannot do retail anymore. So that started the manufacturing industry here in the Philippines with Chinese engaging because they cannot do retail trade unless they become Filipinos. So a big portion also decided to change their status from Chinese to Filipinos and adopt whatever is available here in the Philippines for them to survive.
Rise of China, the importance, influence of China, a lot of things will be given even more importance. As we have more and more businesses with Chinese language speaking communities, not just China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and many Chinese language speaking communities, it's a decided edge and advantage that we have a community that speak Chinese well, fluent in Chinese, and can do business well with these Chinese language speaking communities. It's an opportunity that the Philippines should really take advantage of because these are natural bridges that can bridge the Philippine economy with the bigger economy provided by the Chinese language speaking communities, especially China. When Chinese businesses started to invest here, then the Chinese Filipino community can be a very good bridge, no, for this economic growth, no, to give impetus to this economic growth by taking advantage of this kind of financing, this kind of investments, no, to entice more productive investments into manufacturing and small businesses that will create even more jobs for Filipinos. These are things that the Chinese Filipino community can contribute for the growth of Philippine economy. What we should probably share with our children, no, as they always immerse themselves in TVs and movies, what we should always impart on them are our own stories, the stories of our lives, the stories of our heroes. So whenever we see things on television, if we can communicate with our children about another side of the stories, no? Because there are always parallels. And we should share those kinds of stories so that they will learn to respect this kind of heritage. No? I remember in my elementary, all I remember about Rizal is he's throwing his sleeper into the water so that if somebody pick up the sleeper and all these things, no? And about the firefly. But there's very few of the small stories about folk heroes, small stories about parents' sacrifices, stories of how children have to work hard to get an education. Many, many stories of how difficult life was when they were growing up. No? So these are stories that parents should share with their children. No? And not stories of how making shortcuts allowed them to succeed, no? Yung stories of Gokong Hui, riding his bicycle, plying his wares door to door, no? It's not that Henry C. and John Gokong Hui went to sleep and then dreamt of success and tomorrow they are all successful, no? Henry C. used to just have a very, very small store selling shoes, no, in the sidewalk of Carriedo. And then he succeeded from that small store and all these things. No? Mercury drug, the ancestors of the K family used to peddle medicines door to door after the war, no? Because you need aspirin, you need medicines for this and that. So these are stories that have to be shared with the younger ones.
Chinese by blood, Filipino by heart, #roots is brought to you by Go Tractora, best multi-brand tractor dealer in the Philippines. Real Estate Hub. Agri Pro, Premier Nutrition Inc. Sky Law. Jimmy C. Chua Beng Teng. Nation Paper Products and Printing Corporation. Japan Parts Trading Center. Alejandro Ko. Global Diesel and GU Engineering. Anson Tan. Enrique Chua. Sherwin Choi. Albert Ko. Jersey Haven. Chan Kwan. Thomas Kua. Philflex Wires and Cables. Chen Xia. Nung Family. Tony D. William Goshako. Chinese by blood, Filipino by heart.
Building Bahay Chinoy, Museum of the Chinese in Philippine Life, is one of the things that we really aspired for. No? A museum that will showcase the impact, the influence of the Chinese Filipinos in all events that shaped the Philippines as a nation. During the Revolution, against Spain, the uprisings against Spain, against Japan, against the Americans, in all the periods of Philippine history, there were significant presence of the Chinese Filipinos that we have to let the Filipinos understand, and probably the younger Chinese Filipinos. We have a scene at the start of the museum on the massacre, the sixth massacre of the Chinese during the Spanish times. So I always emphasize that the red part of the Philippine flag have a lot of drops of Chinese blood in it, because the uprisings of the Chinese against the Spaniards are part of all the uprisings of Dagohoy, Gabriela Silang, and all the uprisings against the Spaniards that later on became the conflagration of the Philippine Revolution. But the Chinese started even earlier, 1593. There was already an uprising against the Spanish authorities. So these are stories that we have to share. The intertwining fate and destiny, how our Philippine revolutionists were looked up to and honored by the Chinese revolutionists in 1911, no, of Sun Yat-sen, because we were earlier, 1896. So it's, while the Chinese were fighting the Manchus, we were fighting against the Spaniards. But the Chinese really looked up to the Filipino revolutionists. They said, the Philippines is so small, the population is so little, but it dared to fight not just one, but two white masters, no? The Spaniards and the Americans. They said, these are tributes of Chinese revolutionists, no? The intertwining fate and destiny of how Sun Yat-sen helped the Filipino revolutionists procure arms, and how the Filipino revolutionists also helped the Chinese revolutionists, no, in their struggles, and even inspired them. This is how I work very hard with the rest of the Kaisa friends in putting up this museum and continuing our research, our publications to preserve the history. We are now digitizing a lot of the Chinese newspapers, all Chinese records, no, to showcase the importance of this history, preserving this history, this heritage, and then sharing it with the next generation.
Create a culture of honor and respect and learning how to affirm one another. Because this is something that we can actually give to our kids.
So in spite of the changing times, how do I preserve the culture? there are baby steps you have to take for your family to preserve that culture. If your kids are exposed to a multi-generational community of old cousins and young ones, nephews, they would start to experience all the dynamics of that relationship. I appreciated that. There was such a rich experience of growing up that way na alam mong may connection siya sa who I am today because of the exposure I had when I was young. Culture is amoral eh. Hindi siya masama, hindi siya mabuti. It's culture. It's who we are. It's how we make sense of the world. When a Chinese drifts away from that culture, you won't understand and you can't make sense of the world where you live in. You look this way, you act this way, your culture's this way, your holiday is this way, but there's a disconnect. Why? Why are we doing this? Because you drifted away from the culture. Embracing your own culture, okay, means I'm trying to make sense of my existence because of how I was designed and created. Hindi ko naman pinili maging Chinese. Chinese talaga ako, di ba? So now, I'm making sense with that lens of an Asian as I go into a very global world. Yeah, this is what makes me different. I need to love it. I need to embrace it, di ba? If you lose that, imagine, if I drift away from that, it means I'm embracing another culture that doesn't look like me, that doesn't talk like me, and now I get into that culture. So, whether or not there's a culture that you are trying to embrace, if it's not Chinese, what culture is that? It's a decision that you have to make.
But it's always a decided advantage for everyone to appreciate the intertwining of faith, the intertwining culture, the blending of the two cultures. No? That these things do not just happen by accident. These things were things that were built on because of the history and the evolution of the Chinese-Filipino community. No? We are one country, regardless of our race, our racial origins, our religions, our social status, despite our differences, the ties that bind us together should be more important than the difference that divide us. So, give emphasis to the blending of the two cultures, give emphasis to the intertwining faith and destiny, and set aside many of the conflicts and differences so that we can enrich one another's culture even more and work together to enhance the growth, to hasten the growth and the progress of our country by emphasizing that the economic pie can only grow bigger if you allow the Chinese-Filipinos part to grow bigger and to prosper even more. We cannot move forward to the future if we don't respect the past that have made the Chinese-Filipino community what it is now.
Para sa akin, ang women empowerment is thriving and having the same equal opportunities as other men. Hindi yung parang babae lang kami. Hindi ko siya ginagawa dahil parang I want it to be a grand gesture or, yung gusto mo masabi na may ginawa ka. I know I've been given a rare chance. Not everybody gets the same kind of opportunities. And I have this with me. Ang tanong, what do I do with it?
Chinese by blood, Filipino by heart. #Roots was brought to you by Dash Cargo, propelling possibilities. BA Securities, your trading partner in Asia Pacific.